Okay. And I also wanted to start out with prayer for protection, the James Dillon Freeman prayer, which is a prayer that is mostly associated with unity. And we'll just say this together. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Okay, so I am very interested in this topic, the voice of God, hearing the voice of God. And it actually started long before I heard about New Thought or Unity or anything like that. My very first spiritual teacher, who was an evangelical named Bob Rossi, used to say constantly, hear God and do what he tells you to do. And this was, if you had any question for him, if you had any problem, if you ever listened to a sermon by him or anything, this is how he may talk about other things that always would summarize it with, hear God, do what God tells you to do. And so this was really my foundation when it comes to the voice of God. And I grew up evangelical, and I'd never heard anyone say that you can actually hear the divine, that you can hear God, that you can be directed and guided. So this was pretty much new information for me. I thought that, people could hear God in the past, people, maybe who wrote the Bible, or people who were prophets, or maybe even pastors, but regular people couldn't hear the voice of God. And so this spiritual leader to me was probably had the most profound impact on my spiritual path, because I sort of went into discovery mode, and I searched and tried to figure out, so what does this mean, and how does this fit into my paradigm of life? And at the time, I had a really interesting viewpoint of who God was, and I believed that God was a capricious sky daddy, particularly an angry God and a happy God. And just depending on circumstances or how I'm behaving, that's how this God was going to, react towards me. And if I was being really good, then I would have a happy God, and I would have blessings and all of that. And if I was not being so good, then I would experience an angry God. And not everyone grew up, even in religion, not everybody grows up with an angry God, but most people have a capricious God who is anthropomorphic. So God is just a higher form of man. And that was certainly my perspective of God at the time. And I don't know if you can tell in these pictures, is there anything with both of these pictures, like what do you notice about these pictures?
God's in the sky.
God is in the sky. God's on clouds in both pictures. What else?
How old were you when you made these decisions?
She asked, how old was I when my spiritual teacher told me to hear God and do what he tells you to do, and I was 20. That's how old I was when I first encountered this, but I still had this vision of God. And I went to a church that had the vision of God as this capricious sky daddy. And anybody else have any? Yeah, go ahead.
The happy God is comical.
Yeah, the happy God is comical. I did that on purpose.
Got a big flowing beard and robe on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big flowing beard, robe. So this capricious God we look at as a person. And in New Thought, we don't really see God as a person. And this was something that majorly changed my perspective, especially when it comes to hearing the voice of God. So when I started shifting my perspective, I was actually still in the evangelical church, and I was very interested in the mystics and the old saints like Saint Francis of Assisi. And I started seeing God more as something I am intrinsically connected to. And so that's sort of when my journey started changing. And so let's talk about what Unity says about what God is. And Unity believes that God is principle rather than personality. So that makes it a little bit more interesting, because how do you hear the voice of principles? Which I would say that the principle does have a voice that it can direct and guide us. And I am going. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with this book. It is Around the Year with Emmett Fox. It's kind of like a daily, devotional, and I read it every morning. And so just recently, the main reason why I brought this is because he has, at the first of the year, he has you go through his version of the 7 main aspects of God. And I do want to say that he's not Unity, but he's certainly New Thought, and there are a lot of parallels with his teaching and Unity's teachings. And so the 7 main aspects of God, according to him, are life, the experience of life itself. This doesn't mean God is living. It means God is life, the experience and expression of life. Truth. And this means truth itself. God is love, which is something that even evangelicals will say God is love, because there's a scripture that says God is love in 1 John. Intelligence. God is soul. And for Emmett Fox, soul means God has the capacity to individualize himself and still be transcendent. So this is where we are God. We are God made manifest and becoming more consciously aware of itself. Spirit. And spirit is, to Emmett Fox, was unchangeable substance. It cannot be damaged. It cannot be destroyed. Principle, which that's the first thing I talked about. But principle just means unchangeable in action. And principle is actually why prayers can be answered, because it's always going to be the same. God never changes. Any questions or comments? No? Okay.
What
So,
year?
Say that again?
What years did Emmett Fox live?
I don't know. That's something... I can Google it.
Yeah, I think he was 40s and 50s, and does that kind of feel right to you, James?
I would say a little bit earlier than that.
Okay.
Yeah, because he wasn't too far away from other, like Emma Curtis Hopkins was a major influence on him.
I came a little later.
I think it was later, but I just know that I don't think it was too far. So it might be like the... Through the years of the Great Depression.
So 30s.
Yeah, okay.
51.
So you were real close.
86 to 51.
Okay, he died in 51. Okay.
Yeah, but
And
it
we
was
got a mic?
before the turn of
It's okay. When you say the last one, principle and changeable in action, so much just taking that for granted, like, so what, But that one is the game changer for me, because for one thing, the scripture that says God is not a respecter of persons, that right there, it tells why, even though it seems like God is a respecter, it takes the fear out of life for me. And so even though I like a personalized God when I'm in need of that, the principle is what is the best thing of God to me. Right. And it's because God is intelligence itself, it can be personal, but it is principle as well. And so it can be personal to each of us as soul, as a part of soul, as an individualized version of God. So it's personal, but it can also be principle as well. And principle is sort of the power. That's why, it's how prayers are answered. It's how, our thoughts affect our reality, our experience of reality. That is principle. Did it go? What was that? Oh, no. Okay. Sorry. All right. And so let's talk about Jesus called the voice of God. And we'll look at the titles of the Spirit. So Jesus called the voice of God Spirit, or the Holy Spirit.
And titles, we'll talk about titles for the Spirit and then functions of the Spirit. Jesus called the Spirit Comforter, Advocate or Helper, a good gift, eternal and with you forever. And eternal means eternal past and eternal. It's not really a form of time. It just is the forever now. So it's something that is always with you and cannot be diminished or added to. It's always the fullness. Teacher, the truth. And then the function of the Spirit is to comfort. And then it says, Jesus in John says, to convict of righteousness, sin, and judgment. But or sin, righteousness, and judgment is the order. And so to convict of sin is to miss the mark. And so the Spirit can let us know, hey, if you shoot the arrow right now, you might miss the mark. And that's sort of a progression that we begin to learn as we get more in touch with the Spirit. Shows us right action, which is righteousness. And then judgment is just consequence. Judgment is, okay, so if I stack up all of these dominoes and then I flick the first one over, it's going to knock over the rest of them. So that's all that means. Speaks on the highest authority. Reveals the Christ nature. Tells you what is to come. Lets you know, hey, this is coming up. You can prepare for that. And leads you into all truth. And that's one of my favorite statements. Leads you into all truth, because remember, it's the voice of God is eternal. God is eternal. And so leading into all truth means that forever we are progressing. It's not a one and done. Like, there's not somebody who can just say, okay, now I know it all and everything's fine. You're being led. We're being led into all truth. So then I want to talk about connecting to the Spirit and ways to connect to the Spirit. And the number one way to connect to the Spirit is through meditation, quieting, centering, and listening. Just being still and being open and receptive. And this allows us to be intuitive, or it leads to intuition. And intuition to me is about serenity. That's what really I believe intuition is when we connect to that voice, it calms us down. It lets us feel peace and love and joy and those types of things. So to me, intuition is our capacity to be serene, to be calm. And then that also leads to inspiration, which is direction. And I always say that personally, I believe that intuition comes first, because we can't really be inspired without being calm, because we're going to have all of these other voices. We may have worry or fear, resentment, blame, guilt, criticism, judgment, all of these patterns overshadowing our ability to know what to do next. If somebody's holding on to deep resentment about something, it's very difficult for them, unless they deal with that and transcend that through intuition, through having the Spirit, sort of cleanse that out, applying peace to the situation. It's very difficult to hear the next step, because we're always going to be comparing present circumstances to something that's taken place in the past. So that's what I would refer to as inspiration, the ability to be in spirit. And then the question is, how do you know that it's Spirit? How do you know that it is the voice of God? And so for me, I always go to Galatians 5, which is the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control. And that's my determining factor on whether or not, is this the voice of God? Or is this, maybe an old pattern that is inconsistent with my highest good, but it's still there? And is it leading me to love? Does it sound loving? Is it leading me to love? Is it creating joy in my life and in my experience? Is it leading me to that peace and serenity?
Wendy.
I guess what you talked about before you put this one up.
Okay.
You talked about, in order to hear the Spirit, in order to be with the Spirit, you have to be calm. I know in my life, I may not have known that God was with me and the Spirit was with me, but I can think in the times of my life when I was the least calm, when I was struggling just not to commit suicide moment by moment by moment, or something horrendous was happening to me. There are amazing ways that God was there and Spirit was there, and in powerful ways. And I know now that I do not have to be anything for it to be perfectly in there working in my life 100% there. And I guess I just didn't want anyone to think that they have to reach this place of perfect calm and that in order to have that connection, that strong connection. It's there always.
Right. It's eternal. It's perpetual now and is always available.
So I have a question. You don't think that Spirit can give you an intuition of a premonition of something that you're creating that you don't want to have happen?
Sure. Yeah.
That goes back to the slide before where it says knowing what's going to happen.
Right. Judgment. That would be judgment. The voice of judgment.
Well, because it wasn't the time that I recall, the biggest time in my life that happened, it wasn't anything that, of course, I wasn't aware that it was intuition, right? It was a premonition of something that was going to change my life dramatically and not be very fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't pay attention. and yeah.
Right.
But when I look back on it, I'm going, oh, I could have had a V8 or whatever. But so I think it does come to show you maybe your greatest fears.
Oh yeah. No, and I agree. And these are just words that we're talking about something that's ineffable. Anytime you talk about God, you're talking about something that is ineffable. You don't have words to explain it. And so what we do is we do our best to use examples. For example, the fruit of the Spirit, those are just feelings. Those are mostly feelings. I mean, self-control, I guess, is not really a feeling.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I guess it is a feeling. Maybe faithfulness isn't. I don't know. Yeah, but these are just qualities that let us know. They're not. It's when we're talking about intuition and things like that. We do the best that we can to explain and express what we're doing. At least in my opinion. Oh. Yeah. Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry. Getting pulled two different directions.
One of the things that is different in that idea of intuition and things, when I was in a place in my life where I was very unsettled and everything, I got a lot of intuitions about danger coming or something bad happening and those things that if I listened to helped me. But as I've moved into a place where I'm not in that more jumbled state, the intuitions are not warnings as much. I don't get as much of any of that. The same way I used to feel other people's pain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel other people's pain. I see them as whole people. And so it's a different relationship with Spirit now than it was when I was in a less calm state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, meditation itself is a practice. And that to me is the starting point. And this class isn't really about meditation, but that is, for me, the starting point when it comes to enhancing your intuition. However, you're connected to Spirit all the time. Like Sue was saying, I mean, we're always connected to Spirit, and Spirit is always speaking to us. The divine is always speaking to us. I think that we can interpret it differently based off of where we're at in terms of our mental and emotional atmosphere, where we're at in our lives and what circumstances are taking place. Because the voice of Spirit doesn't always, for me anyways, it comes mostly through feeling. It's not like a voice. It's not, James, do this. It's not that. It's more of a feeling. And as an example, years ago, I got kicked out of Bible school, and I was working on campus. I was living on campus. I was just very invested, and so when I got kicked out, I ended up finding myself in Kansas City, homeless and no place to go. I just didn't have anything. Everything I owned was in a car, and I drove to a coffee shop, and I sat there, and I spent my last little bit of money on a coffee, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I had this feeling to go talk to a total stranger in the coffee shop. But it was a feeling. It wasn't the voice of God. However, I had practiced this presence enough to know that there's something here. And I remember actually at the time I was really angry because I didn't think things were going to turn out that way. And I remember saying, I don't even believe in you anymore. I don't know why you're talking to me, So I did. I went and I didn't initiate conversation. Instead, he was on one couch. There was a couch facing the couch with a coffee table in the middle, and I sat on the opposite couch and I just sat there. And eventually, he started talking to me. And I really didn't say anything about anything that happened, but he started saying, well, I'm not from Kansas City. I moved here from Springfield, actually. I moved here from Springfield, Missouri, to go to seminary. But they kicked me out for being gay. And I was like, wow, you're not going to believe this. And he had just purchased a 4-bedroom house and was like, it's just me and the dog if you want to come stay with us. And I stayed, and I didn't pay anything, and I actually stayed there until I had a job and paid rent after that for a few years because we just were really good friends. We had a lot in common. And so none of that led me there, none of that was a voice. It wasn't like somebody's telling me to do something. It was an instinct that I was able to cultivate over time through what I call centering, at the time I called centering prayer, which we would maybe refer to as meditation. And so, to me, it's not, like a voice. I guess it could come across as a voice, especially if you're engaging with other people and God is speaking through someone. That's going to sound like a voice. Oh, gosh, I can't remember the name of the author. Oh, Iana Van Zandt, I think is her name. And she was writing about somebody who asked her, what does the voice of God sound like? And she said, she sounds a lot like me. I think that's really good.
Well, it doesn't always sound like that. And if you cultivate a desire to do something, then spirit will be. There's over on by the McDonald's over on Sunshine there. There's a sign on the side, and there's flowers that a young man was killed there. But before the sign went up, there was a woman and some kids sitting down there, and as I was going past there, I literally heard a male voice say, give them some money and tell them to go out to lunch on me. And later they put a sign that said his name was Wyatt Lafferty, I think is the name they put there. Now that was a male voice because it was a male spirit. So I don't know, is that the voice? Would you consider that the voice of God? Or is that just a spirit?
So for me, I always line it up with the fruit of the Spirit. Is it loving, joy? Does it lead me to joy? Does it lead me to peace? Does it lead me to patience, kindness? And it doesn't have to always lead me. Like sometimes, kindness might not be relevant in the situation. So it might not, if it's not an interpersonal situation that I'm personally receiving intuition on, it may not lead to kindness, although it may expand my capacity for kindness later on. That, so that's my litmus test, and we'll actually get into that a little bit in the next slide.
Am I on?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Hold it close, Don.
What you were describing a while ago, meeting this young man, reminds me of how it happens to me as well. And I come to think of it as gossamer strings that are drawing us through life, because it's not something that's on the verge of being tangible, but it's not. It just tells you when this is right. It's beyond thought even. It doesn't tell you what to do or even what not to do, but that the fact that you were on track.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just for my own 2 cents worth here, my own personal belief, my own personal experience is that I felt like the voice of God, which I do call Holy Spirit also, it's a comforting feeling for me to call up Holy Spirit. But I feel like Holy Spirit is speaking to us all the time.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of break through that shell of ego or whatever we are constantly in order to hear that voice of God. And for me, yes, like Miss Van Zandt said, it can be your own, coming through with your own thought, your own voice. But I've had it come in so many different ways.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a colorful thing if you're open to it. It's like you can just be so in shock over how that Holy Spirit is speaking to us.
Yeah.
Twice it spoke, actually a car spoke to me 2 different times and told me what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Billboards. And we're going to get into a little bit of that in the next slide too. But yeah, there's so many different ways, symbols, and just different ways. Sometimes it's an adventure, especially something that's deeply symbolic, like a dream can speak to you. I actually did want to mention one other thing with that story that I told. The guy that invited me to live with him, he knew that it was right because we didn't know each other at all. We were complete strangers. But the day before, he was in that same coffee shop. And he never went to that coffee shop because they allowed smoking in the coffee shop. This was a long time ago, as you can tell. They allowed smoking in the coffee shop, and he could not stand it. But he was in that coffee shop the day before because he was going to a church, and the minister wanted to meet at that coffee shop because he just wanted to have a discussion with the minister. And in that discussion, and I didn't find this out until like 5 or 6 years later, in that discussion, he told his minister, "I really want God to send me someone to help." And there I was the very next day. And that he would even go back to that same coffee shop that he can't stand because he was probably following his intuition or gut feeling. And so, that's sort of how, synchronicity works and how, our path unfolds. And, I would really recommend, we have opportunities here to volunteer, but I would really recommend, if you want to live in a better world, create a better world. Maybe I know that we talk a lot about the law of attraction, which is one of the universal principles, and Wayne Dyer was the one who kind of introduced me to this. But he says, you know what? If you send out into the universe, how may I serve? The law of attraction brings back the universe saying, how may I serve? And that's when you gain access to infinite resource. So just put that in there. That's kind of related, but not really to the topic. So the next slide. Other ways of hearing the Spirit. Guides, gurus, spiritual teachers, and community. And so here are just some examples. Jesus, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, are guides for our church. They developed, this community. Abraham or Esther Hicks. St. Francis of Assisi is one that's a very powerful influence for me, especially when I was younger. I used to, when I was first in Bible school, like I was talking before, I would go to a Franciscan monastery, and they had a prayer trail, a meditation trail, and I would walk, and I would sort of go through different poems or different things that St. Francis wrote, and it was or just the prayer of St. Francis, and it was just very powerful for me, and it was just a way that I feel very close to St. Francis, so that's why I put him on here. Louise Hay is another one that was a very powerful teacher for me in the past. And does anybody else have any teachers that you have heard the voice of God or connected with the voice of God through?
Yeah. Emma Curtis Hopkins.
Emma Curtis Hopkins, yeah.
I don't necessarily say, I've seen people who they start to say that they have to have a guru, and they find this guru, and the guru tells them what to do, and they always have to do what somebody else is telling them to do. It's kind of a slippery slope in there. We had a good friend in Joplin that he loved where he was. He loved his job. He was having a wonderful time, and he went to a spiritual healer type person, and the spiritual healer says, you don't belong in Joplin, you need to go and live in this other place. And he goes, I don't want to live there. I love what I'm doing here. Everything's wonderful, but I guess I'm going to have to go. And I'm going, what? You know, that person is not the bossy, you guy.
Right.
So it's just, you know, I don't know. There's a kind of there for me when it.
Sure. So and we can also learn from each other, and the next slide's going to address exactly what you're saying. We're going to take another quote from Jesus. He said, call no man teacher, for you only have one teacher, and that is the Spirit.
Wow.
But does that negate what we were just talking about?
No.
That a teacher can have a profound impact on our lives?
Well, there's a very ancient saying that goes that when you are ready, the teacher arrives.
Yeah.
But when you have it, the teacher departs.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't go to that extent to have that kind of understanding. That the teacher doesn't need to necessarily stay because he's busy.
Right.
And once you've achieved what he is there to teach, then he can, or she, can move on. There have been many times when I've traveled in China to various Buddhist monasteries and temples and one thing or another, and always wondered whether or not, what am I doing? Am I in the right path? What should I be doing? And the Spirit, whatever you want to call it, was present, and it is always present. It's a matter of whether we are open to listening
Right.
to that Spirit, and if we are ready to move with our feet, as we say, in the direction of our divine guidance, you might say.
In kind of answer to the last slide question, the Thich Nhat Hanh, who died yesterday, and Ram Dass. was
Oh, yeah, I
also,
like Ram Dass.
I think another teacher that
Yeah.
I found helpful.
Yeah. Anybody else have another teacher that maybe they want to?
Well, this is kind of indirect, but I was raised a Christian Scientist. So Mary Baker Eddy was the person that my mother read her Science and Health every single day. And even though I didn't really adopt that, I was raised with that. I was raised with there's not a spot where God is not. And the fact that this world is an illusion. Anytime any of us fell and got cut or bruised or anything, we were taught to put it behind us because it wasn't the truth. And most of the time, it was never there after we just went on and did our thing, and it was never there. We didn't have, I don't even think we had Band-Aids in the house when I was a kid. There was no such thing as an aspirin. There was actually no coffee or tea. And that was the way I was raised, and it was that so much freedom. And so it came down through her teachings, through my grandmother, both of my grandmothers, and my mother and my father. And so it was just a whole different way of growing up. And when I see all the things that people say they have issues with, most of the time, that's not in my space. If it is, it's because I've adopted it since I was an adult. But most of the time, it's not in my space because I wasn't raised that way. So I have to credit her.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw in, again, my 2 cents here. I have so much gratitude for so many teachers in my life. And anytime that we've learned from someone, anytime that someone has helped us understand and elevate our awareness and the beauty that's inside of us, sure, we all have that inner teacher. And I think that's what Jesus was saying.
Yeah.
We all do have that inner teacher, and sometimes it's others who help us to understand that, to elevate our own inner teacher. And yet, that gratitude for me is there for all who have helped elevate that in myself.
Yeah. There was a guru that once, and I can't remember his name, but he said, I have some bad news for everybody. Half of what I'm going to tell you is going to uplift you. It's going to allow you to manifest wonderful things in your life. It's going to, it'll heal you of all of your diseases. And the other half is going to destroy you. It will cause sickness. You'll lose everything. And then he said, but the real problem is I don't know which is which.
It wasn't for him to know.
Yeah. So that's what we really have to take into consideration is, does it resonate with me? Because even some of the teachers that, I've had spiritual teachers in my life, there's a lot I disagree with too. I'm taking SEE classes, and it's interesting to disagree with some of the Unity teachers. With Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, that's like a big deal. I'm like, well, I just don't see it that way, So yeah.
The Abraham Hicks teachers, which are my door into metaphysics, and my main one, the very first tape I ever heard her say, she said, if this resonates with you, pick it up and listen to it. And if it doesn't resonate with you, put it down and go find what does. And if in the future, if it resonates with you now, and if in the future it no longer resonates with you and something else does, put it down and go with what does.
Yep. Yeah, and I have found that sometimes things work really well for me for a short time, and then they stop working. One of the things, are you familiar with EFT or thought field therapy or tapping? Okay, so that when I was introduced to that like 15 years ago, that worked it was a life-changing thing for me. And I even became like a thought field therapy and EFT like practitioner. I mean, because it worked so well for me, and I still recommend it to this day. It does nothing for me now, not a thing. And I found that it was interesting because I kind of just happened upon it. I was listening to some just music, and a chant came on. And I started chanting along with the chant and realized that I had almost the same experience that I would have with tapping, with the emotional release. And so now I chant, and I have a very similar experience when it comes to emotional release. And so sometimes even what worked for us yesterday isn't going to work for us today. And that's why it's important, because it can become very frustrating if we are trying to live our present circumstances through past experiences. It can become very frustrating to try to keep doing the same things if it no longer works for us. And again, I still recommend thought field therapy and emotional freedom technique because I think that they really worked. They worked for me. They just don't work as effectively anymore. And so I think that that's part of hearing the Spirit as well, is recognizing, okay, this, isn't really working for me anymore.
I don't think that it doesn't work, but in the beginning, it helps you to focus, it helps you to believe in something, and it's that belief and that focus that causes it. And it's kind of like Emma Curtis Hopkins says, if you believed in a dead sardine head and you got other people to believe in it, that dead sardine head would become an object that actually healed people, but it was never the object. And once we learn beyond that, then we don't need to go like this. We just know we can do it. And I think that's why it changes for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I agree. Okay, going back to other ways of hearing the Spirit. Divination. Some people really don't like this one, and I kind of do. I like tarot. I like oracle cards. I have runes. I just appreciate it. And it's something that has worked really well for me in the past. The one thing I would say with divination is it just is whatever power you're giving it. You know? So cards, here are some examples. Runes, divination stones. Like in the Bible, there was the Urim and the Thummim, where it was a divination system that kind of worked like yes, no. And the stones, had certain meanings. I Ching, and those are just some examples. And I don't know if anybody has examples of divination or not, but those are just some of the examples I came up with.
My point that I'd like to make with this is that you can't hear music on a radio station if you don't tune in.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a way for spirit to reach us. And opening ourselves up and using something like an oracle deck or something like that is just another way of trying to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That, as opposed to summoning something evil.
Yeah, I agree.
For thousands of years, as a follow-up to the I Ching, divination was determined many times by trying to read the lines in a tortoise shell.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, when there was not that many more turtles left, they decided to use the sticks. That's what they used. But the shaman would always use the connection to the spirits and the stars, the universe, and whatever you want to call it, to actually read into the current situation, whatever was going on at the time, the elements that needed to be said as it relates to reading the shell. And many times it was how it would be, how we would see it as cracking. They would put the shell over a fire, and as the shell would crack, the lines on the shell would convey the meaning as to what the universe was telling him or her, many times it was her, as to what direction to take.
Interesting.
There was a very famous lady who was a shaman who could read the tortoise shell very well. And she became a very strong military leader on behalf of the emperor, because she could not only act as the shaman, but also as the general leading the armies.
Oh, wow.
When did you do something?
I much prefer the sticks over the tortoise shell.
Just an example of divination. My background is Mormon, and matter of fact, they really were like not to meditate or to get, to connect or anything. But when we were in Joplin, we were doing genealogy. And there's a belief there with genealogy and your ancestors that there's work that you need to do for them, spiritual work. And so it's very serious in the Mormon religion that I come from. And there was a man in the genealogy library who used divining rods, and they would go out to cemeteries and use the divining rods, and they could literally go with those divining rods, and where there was no markers, they would go to the divining rod, and they'd go, is this a male? Is it a female? Where was the head? And then they would go alphabetically to find the name. And what they had is they would have the records, and they didn't know any of the names, but they could alphabetically find the name of who was there, and then they could put a marker on it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It worked.
Wow. Anybody else with divination? No? Okay. Connecting to nature. Nature speaks to us. Through synchronicity, which this is nature, by the way. Nature just isn't going outside. This is, the nature is what is natural. And this is, so this is just a part of nature. So I have synchronicity. And I do have observation of the natural and physical realm. And Jesus did this a lot. He'd say, okay, look at the birds, see how they don't, toil, and God provides them everything that they need. Look at the fields, and look how they're clothed with flowers. And not even Solomon was clothed so beautifully. And so connecting to nature is a very profound way, whether it's synchronicity or observation of the natural realm, to hearing the Spirit. Does anybody have any comments to that?
Thank you. The first time I was introduced to synchronicity was through Deepak Chopra. Unless I misunderstand what he's saying, is that it's sort of an acausal occurrence, which is so so difficult to explain, yet undeniable, that logic won't experience it, and won't describe it. And there's I've heard also that this isn't so, and it's very confusing. But his being such an astute student of the truth, I tend to go with him, because other people will say that if you analyze it sufficiently, everything has a cause and everything has an effect, and I don't think that's true. I think there is a, if I may use the term, magical relationship between some situations that interact with each other. I think some things are just not explainable in rational terms.
Yeah. Does anybody have experience with synchronicity? Yeah, probably. Well, I mean, some people that I've heard describe it, it's like for them, it's just always on. And that's not been my experience, but it has been my experience that it's always on when I'm experiencing something that's life-changing. When a pattern is really changing, that's when I tend to, and it's like something flips a switch. Like when I started going to Unity, it was, when I made the decision, I didn't really know anything about Unity. And I looked up Unity because I felt like when we moved, I was just felt like looking up churches, and Unity didn't have very good SEO, so it was at the bottom of the list of churches in Springfield. But I don't know why, but I just I clicked on it and I was like, this one feels right. Unity of Springfield feels right. And so I started looking up Unity, and I was listening to some music that unity.org had put out. And I was like, wow, this is a really great song. And it was a song that was written to LGBTQI people. And I sent it to one of the ladies from my local PFLAG in Michigan. And she says, oh, I know this person. I said, you know, she said, well, I think I know it. I think I know his wife. And so I got connected with his wife and we started sharing. And so we end up moving, and I'm coming here. And so I actually brought this little tiny journal, because this little tiny journal was started in, it would have been 2005. 2005 is when this little tiny journal was started. And I was just writing down my own spiritual journey, like what was going on, in me and through me. And so the very first page, I wrote, "The light of God surrounds me." I looked it up. Somehow I got connected with this. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God flows through me, and the presence of God is, anyway. But it's the very first page.
Wow.
And so the craziest thing about this little journal is I thought I had lost it years ago. And when I moved, I was just kind of unpacking boxes, and it fell out of one of the boxes when I moved to Springfield. And I was like, wait a minute, that's the prayer that we pray on Sunday mornings at Unity of Springfield. And so that, to me, is what I mean.
Yes.
Major life experiences and events usually bring about synchronicity for me. Go ahead.
So I was watching a documentary on Lake Baikal, Russia, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's my home. I need to go there. I was just like in Russia, and I studied Russian, and I studied Lake Baikal, and I studied all those things, and it was so powerful. And then several years later, but the Iron Curtain was still up, so And several years later, I meet this person on the internet. It's not a relationship, but he's cutting a stone called seraphinite from Lake Baikal, Russia. And I am cleaning his trailer in exchange for some seraphinite. And I put on the Abraham Hicks tape and got my introduction to Abraham Hicks. I've never really been interested in Russia after that.
Interesting. We're gonna finish up real quick, but I have one more slide that. Oh no, spiritual and religious books. We'll go through this really quick. The Talmud, the Bible, Vedic scriptures, Tao Te Ching, Course in Miracles. You Can Heal Your Life was a big life changer for me. There's a lot of them. I mean, we could talk all day about music, music books. Okay, and how do we filter out messages from the outside? And so Jesus said, "You will know them by their fruits. You cannot gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles. Every good tree bears good fruit, and every bad tree bears bad fruit. Therefore, you will know them by their fruits." Although I always think of this, and I'm like, Jesus never had a raspberry. At least he never picked them. I love raspberries. And so the fruit. We're fruit checkers. We are fruit checkers. And so we can use the fruit of the Spirit. Does this produce love in me? Does it produce joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control? And self-control to me, in this context means, is it empowering? Because I'll tell you, I do know some people who use the tarot and it's not very empowering. Some people have to run to the tarot to answer every question. To me, the tarot can expand my intuition, or it can limit it by using it that way. And so I think that those are the questions that are best asked when we're talking about, getting information from outside sources. Now, your intuition is always on your side, so you can trust that. And that's it. Oh, I think if we want to close with a prayer for protection again, do it again. Is that like it? Is it on there?
It was.
It was.
It's just.
It really is there.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So we'll go do it together. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was so good and so refreshing. And you always bring up so many points. And I love it that everybody gets stimulated to want to talk. Thank you, Susan. And contribute, because it just shows how much we're really into what you have to say and what you brought to the class. And you're a very, very valuable part of this and our church. So I just wanted to start off by saying my heart is heavy today. It's been a real tough week. I've had a number of things. My best friend died last month. I think I've told you that before, and it's still affecting me greatly. Tom Long, of course, passed away a couple days ago, and Tom was such an integral part of this class,
Yes.
as well as our church. I believe he started coming in 2004. And he was one that welcomed me when I was kind of coming back and forth, between, not coming and coming here. And he was always that foundation for me. And I think that's why it's affecting me so much. He was so brilliant. He was such a wise person and such a quiet person. But I wanted to point out the basket. This was one thing when Kenneth had class for years and years, and then when I picked it up after Kenneth left, Tom would always be the one who would bring the basket and take care of the finances. So I'm gonna rename this Tom. So if I ever say we're passing Tom around, you'll know what I mean. And I do have to point out again a couple things. John mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh passed away yesterday. And again, he was a great spiritual leader, so loved by so many. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about Thich Nhat Hanh. And then lastly, we have, I'm sorry.
Colburn.
Yeah, I was going to mention, lastly, Coburn, who was a big part of our church. And he was such a good person. And I know most of you probably knew of him, at least if you didn't know him. But he did attend church here. I don't know if he was ever a member or not, but he was certainly a part of our church and well loved. And he passed away. I believe yesterday was that
Something
correct?
like that, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, those are those things that are weighing on me right now. I woke up feeling heavy. I still feel heavy. I'll probably feel heavy for a while. I know they're all in a great place. I know that they're the ones who are celebrating. They're the ones who are having joy. As far as Tom goes, his funeral is tomorrow. It's about an hour's drive from here. If any of you are interested, that may be mentioned in church today. I know we'll have a celebration of life here, probably in the spring. And then that way we can share our love for Tom. So, getting to the announcements, it's possible that our cold weather shelter will be open the next 9 or 10 days or so, probably without a break. The organizational meeting for this year's Planet Unity Earth Day will take place directly after church today in this room, in the fellowship hall. And then the training session with Kat Presco for the live stream team will take place directly after the service here in the sanctuary. So we've got a couple different things going on right after church today. I encourage you to participate. Working for Planet Unity has been such a joy for me in the last few years, and I know what Kat is doing is just so important, for our church. This is what is bringing out our message to those who don't feel safe, right now with COVID maybe, or they just can't get to church or whatever. We have a lot of people that are following online. Next thing, mat weaving continues on Thursdays, 12:30 to 2:30. Next week here, we have our New Thought and World Religions class. Amy Burnett's going to be talking on conscious living. And then, of course, next Sunday, our annual meeting, the 30th, immediately after the service, we'll be electing 3 board members. And so all are invited, but only Unity members can vote. There are many openings on the flower donation calendar found on the bulletin board, and that's in the hallway outside the sanctuary. Print your name on the chosen date, your phone number, and dedication you would like, and then that is a donation of $50. So thank you all for showing up. It's such a joy to see all of your faces. I love each and every one of you, and I'm so grateful for you. So if we can